Welcome, listeners, to episode 30 of Future Secured. And today we're going to dive into one of the most underutilized tools in cybersecurity, red teaming. Just before we jump in, can I just ask you to hit that subscribe button so you can get more great stories like this when they pop up. So, red teaming. Despite its effectiveness, many organizations, including government and large enterprises, still don't employ offensive security properly or at all. And today, to break this down, we're joined by Remy Coll, founder of Redacted. And we're going to explore why red teaming isn't being effectively used, the real value of offensive security beyond just penetrating testing, and the holes in Australia's cyber and sovereign capability, and touch on our over-reliance on US-based solutions. So thank you, Jason, my co-host, for joining me as always. Thank you, Remy, for joining us. And over to you, Jason, for our first question.
Penetrating testing, I like that. That's a new term that I think we should start using. I've heard of pen testing before, but and penetration testing. But I think Remy, have you maybe added that to the model since last time we spoke? I didn't know that.
Yeah, we'll put that.
you.
It's slightly left. It's doing a pen test, then doing a pen test of the pen test. You're penetrating
That's right.
the penetration test. Yeah,
I
that's
like
exactly.
it. Yeah, I don't know what color. What color are we going to make that one though? Because we've got red teams and purples and
I think
we've
you can
got.
move it up on the scale. Put a bit of green in, although that might make it brown testing. I don't know.
Exactly. Yeah, I'm not sure where we're going, but I like it. I like it. It's a good start. So, just for the listeners, do you want to just give us a bit of a background, like where you started, how you sort of got to where you are? Because this subject, it comes up a lot. So, and I know a lot of people when they try and get into cybersecurity or look to, this tends to be one of the first aspects. And this is what I
Yep.
think a lot of people think cybersecurity is, right? Is red teaming, and this is the sort of sexy part, or we talk about the black hats and the white hats, etc. Can you just give us a bit of your background, a brief intro on sort of how you got to where you are now, and sort of just fill in a few gaps for people that may not know you?
Thanks, Jason. Thanks, Tom, for having me. So yeah, you were right in what you were saying that most people go, I want to be in cybersecurity and I want to be a hacker. That's what
Yeah.
everybody does. They always go, how can I get into penetration testing or offensive security, despite there being hundreds of different jobs in cybersecurity. My background is actually defensive ops. It's nearly all defensive stuff. So I was doing what you would currently call cybersecurity back before people were saying cyber again. We said it in the '80s, and then we didn't say it anymore. And I was working in some IT security or network implementation, network architecture sort of stuff. And people used to tell IT security to shut up a lot. And then somebody said cyber, and then suddenly they were on board, which I am absolutely here for. Like, I love that, with the rebranding, suddenly IT security is sexy.
Yeah.
But I got pulled into some of defense's new cyber capabilities at the time, and spent some time in the army full time doing defensive cyber there, leaning on my background in IT, network engineering, and IT security. And then got out of that, did a bunch of stuff in industry, and then founded Redacted Information Security with a buddy of mine, Simon, who was he was an offensive operator at ASD. And together we examined what red teaming is in the market, how Australia, how the US, how the world kind of does it. And I brought a distinctly blue perspective, and he brought a very aggressive red team perspective into it. But we kind of came to a thinking that a lot of stuff wasn't being done right, and that's kind of from that merge of that blue and that red teaming, that blue and that red team opinion. And it's not so much that purple teaming isn't effective. It's a bit more than that.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's
No,
my
that's good.
background.
Yeah, no, that's good. I think also, and we'll get into this, and I just wanted to sort of do it off the top, is that we're sort of kindred spirits in cyber, in the way we're sort of looking outside of cyber to try and help people or those more vulnerable in the community as well. So I sort of wanted to sort of get into that, but I think I just want to get that off the top because what you do is something that I think a lot of people want to do, but it's a misunderstood part of cyber. but also with the other stuff we're looking to do together, and with Annie Hagar in particular, sort of being that sort of conduit between sort of how we met. I'd like to in this get into a bit of that part
Sure.
of it as well, and how we can sort of, because a lot of the stuff we talk about, and a lot of the people probably that you end up helping are probably at the part where they're protecting themselves, but we're often leaving a layer well below that.
Let's dive into the culture around this then. So, I'm really struck by the fact that, that pen testing is something that's done in a lot of places. Hopefully it's being done. But this is like an extra level. Actually, you almost need some confidence or some kind of like with your business to be able to go and invite some people to come in and actually try and break into it. Yet the learnings from this will be so powerful, and be able to kind of really help you be cyber secure for your IP, your organization, or your team members. And we've seen, we saw the lawyers hack the other day. We've seen the Jenna hack recently, and what we're seeing is this impact just flow through down to individuals that aren't directly involved, and it's having a real change on their lives. So this is something that can really, really shift that if we can create the right culture. So just dive into that a little bit for me. What do you see out there?
Sure. People tend to conflate all red teaming with penetration testing,
Mm.
which I think is penetration testing has a really great role to play, and it's been doing that, especially in Australia. Been doing that pretty well. People recognise that they make a new system. Whether they're making their own application, they're buying something off the shelf, they're putting up some cloud infrastructure, and they think, oh, before I make this go live, I should get a penetration test, right? And that thinking is good, but it's very technology focused. So that thinking is very much around: have I implemented what I'm supposed to implement on the either on the bare metal or in the cloud, whatever the case may be, or in software, in a secure way. And one of the ways that they get that is via doing a penetration test. But we, in the industry, we know that good security, the best security, is created at the nexus between people, technology, and process. You can't just say, yeah, we've configured this correctly. You need processes in place to make sure that your admins keep it configured that way, or that if something comes out to say, a vulnerability comes out to say, well, it's in fact not configured correctly, and this is the new way of doing things and the new way of thinking. You need a process to be able to adopt that and keep things secure over time. Not just that, but you need the right people to do it. You need those people to be trustworthy, and you need to have controls around who you let on your system, to what level, and how. So when we think about security, we should instead be thinking about that nexus point. So why then are we only using penetration testing a lot when it really only focuses on the technology component? Now, you could say, oh, well, people get physical penetration tests all the time, and that is true. But again, that's only focusing on one aspect. The core of what red teaming should be, and what really the professional red teaming is behaving like an adversary and being able to measure and quality assure that nexus point between people, technology, and process. That's quite difficult to comprehend, I think, for business owners and for government organizations, that you will really be testing everything from your incident response plan to your backup and recovery to the technology that's on the stack itself, and that it's not necessarily about any one thing. There's a saying in the army that no plan survives the first shot, and that has found to be true again and again and again and again. In cybersecurity, you have an unbelievable amount of plans. You
Mm.
have your incident response plan, you have your continuous monitoring plan, you have your backup and recovery plan, you have intrusion detection and prevention plans, you have all sorts of things, right? Everything gets written down. Unfortunately, we let the adversary take the first shot. And that is
Mm.
the first time that we know that our plan does not survive. And that is not a good time to know that your plan does not survive, when the adversary is already there taking shots. So if we think about that, really, we should be taking that first shot ourselves. We should be taking
Yeah.
that first shot and going, what works and what doesn't. And that is true red teaming. That must come from a technical background. So you need to have people actually on your systems doing that adversary emulation, doing that red teaming, so that your blue team has the tools at their disposal and is actually activating the plans with conscious thought that there is something going on.
Yeah, that's good because that's the thing is, and I've seen it live where plans get tested and been in the war room, so to speak, when everything gets deployed and you can do as many tabletop exercises and as many
Yeah,
things as you
it's
want.
not the
But
same.
and I think similar to your thing, and we use it all the time here, everyone has a plan till they're punched in the face, the famous sort of Mike Tyson line, right? It's you can
Yeah,
shadow box and punch bags as much as you want, but once you're in the ring and it's fair income and the gloves are on
yeah,
and it's on. And you get that first hit in the head that shakes your brain around, and you start to see little stars and all that sort of
yeah,
stuff. It just completely changes the game, and you start breathing differently and everything. And this is what happens in incidents, right? It's the same sort of thing.
yeah.
And also to your point too, like when you're talking about people and process, etc. We talk about frameworks like the NIST framework or the MITRE frameworks, or any of those sorts of things that get used. A board or a business can get those sort of reports too and know that we're checking off against something, but a lot of that goes flying out the window as soon as it's a new attack vector that no one's ever seen before. And no matter how you've got your plans laid out, they often fail when it is, an attack that you're just not expecting.
And again, when you have, like you're saying, when you have a new attack vector, usually attack vectors will focus on one of the people, technology, or process. Right, you'll either be
Correct.
able to
Yeah.
try and
Usually
manipulate a
people.
user or an administrator, or you'll be trying to get inside some sort of process so that the logical way in which that organization conducts their security is flawed, or you'll get in through a technological means.
Mm,
But I can tell you that normally the best responses to data breaches or incidents uh, are the ones that have quite comprehensive plans. And like in your
mm,
boxing analogy, is that when you get punched in the face, as soon as you get punched in the face, your hands come up, right?
yep.
And you know exactly what you should be doing, and you just simply react. And you start reacting in a way that everybody knows they should react, and they have confidence in the way that they are able to react that way.
Mm,
It surprises me that it's still so difficult for organizations to do. Back, I think, when was it? 2011, maybe uh, the first broad publication by the minor corporation of
mm,
the 10 strategies of a world-class security operations center was put out, and that it is an amazing document.
mm,
But one of the key points in there, one of the whole chapters is you must give the SOC the authority to do what it needs to do, right? And if you have a plan that beholdens the SOC to
mm,
the IT sections, one of the things they care about quite greatly is uptime
yep.
and access, right? They're there for business facilitation. If your SOC comes under them and they are not empowered to do their work, they cannot stop the bleeding. It doesn't matter. Your plan says, "Oh, activate the instant response, do this,
Mm,
do this here," but unless they are powered to quite literally shut down virtual machines to sit there and go, "We are stopping the bleeding now," it is quite difficult for them to be able to do their jobs.
yep.
So if they can't take the actions that they can take, then what are you supposed to do? Now that comes out. The only way for that to come out is in a red team exercise. I mean, before a real incident.
Yep.
But the only way for that to come out is by using red team, because when you do a tabletop, people sit there and they go, "Yeah, I would do this," and they would,
Yeah. Shuffle
and IT
paper.
security would be like, "Yeah, I would do this," and whatever else,
Yeah.
and everybody would be like, "Yeah, we did a great job,"
Mm. Let's have
but
lunch.
yeah, let's have lunch. Who's
And
catering?
you don't usually
So
during an attack. You usually don't have lunch. You don't have dinner. Maybe an
no,
odd pizza or so,
but
and
that's
you do
that's
not
one of
sleep.
the
That's
plans.
the other
That's
thing, right?
part of the
Yeah.
plan, right? If you
Yeah.
find out that your plan does not include just one of the business management people being like, somebody has to, just like
Order food.
communications, just like,
Mm,
yeah, who's doing the catering? Who is
yeah.
pushing stuff to the war room? Because
Yep.
if you're one or two absolute guns on the machines, are fighting, they're like,
Yep.
yes, we found indicators here, and I'm stopping this, doing this, examining this process. Then after 20 hours, they're basically falling over. If you want them to
Yeah.
sit
Correct.
there and solve the
That happens
incident,
all the time, and that's
feed
the
and
biggest wash
water
up.
them.
That's it. That's the biggest wash up in a lot of incidents that I saw, and even in this, and this one that I talk about, and I've mentioned it before, but it was replicated to the point, Remy, where only the CISO and one other person knew this was going to happen, to the point where they had fake PR people catch the CEO as he went into the car park at 7:20 in the morning. It
That's
was a
great.
full run one, and as I said to Tom before, and I've mentioned here, the person who came up with the solution, because everything was offline, it was completely taken offline, and it
Yeah,
was actually a 23-year-old ex-nurse. So she'd changed career switch during
oh
COVID.
yeah,
She just got a bit over, and she went into cybersecurity. She was the only one who had the cool head. Like we had, obviously cameras inside the organization that they do have there.
yeah,
She went to the drawer and said, "Remember, everyone else's hair on fire," and she's just gone, "Remember the folder?" And we open it up
with the
and we
plan.
go through the process with the plan. Yeah,
Yeah,
seriously, that's what happened. She's
yeah,
opened the
yeah,
drawer and gone, "Remember this folder? Like when we did that tabletop exercise,
yeah,
we go
yeah.
through the plan, right? Cool as a cucumber, right?" And everyone else was sort of, experienced people go, "Ah, ah,"
I know, and that's
hands on
and that,
fire.
like you were saying, that's that cross skilling piece, right? And
Yeah.
you never know, and it's about like it's about the plan and rehearsing the plan. And nurses are
Mm.
incredible at that. My
Yeah.
my wife's a nurse, and when we were looking at daycare centers for our kids, we were going around a few. Every single one she would go to, she would ask a person at the daycare center, "Where is your
First
emergency
aid.
medical plan?
Yeah.
Where is your
Yep.
first aid plan? Where are they happening?" And if they couldn't go and be like, "It's in this drawer, here it is," and hold it up and show her, she'd be like, "No way,
Yep.
you're not
Not
sending
doing
our
it.
kids here," because she go, that is part of it, right? And that is a
Mm.
microcosm of a red team, right? If something
Yep.
happens, you know, follow the bouncing ball through, right? You need to
Mm.
find where the problems are and the links in that chain of events that you want to happen.
Mm.
And the only way of doing that is by inducing that yourself.
With cyber, we look at, we need to fill gaps, right? And
Yeah.
where often the wrong place to look is, let's put more students through cybersecurity programs. Whereas I think we can, and I believe like you do, and we've spoken about before, is that we can get people from other areas that may have started a role, and we all change roles. I think the next generation of
Yeah.
kids will probably change roles 7 to 10 times, right? That's sort of been shown. But to get someone from a space like that has that calmness to come into cyber, for getting, governance, risk and compliance professionals, that might come from accounting or law or something else, which has a similar skill set, but they're just sort of over that and want to go do something else. Because what we do, Remy, and what you do, I believe is very critical and like medical in a lot of ways. I think we need to sort of approach it in a similar sort of way and how we look at it. Because I think a lot of people like you and I and others that we know in the industry, we care very deeply about other people and we want to protect other people. And that's sort of, whether that's why people choose to become a police officer, a fire-person, an ambulance worker, or
Yeah.
someone who works in medical. I think a lot of cyber people I know, a lot of cyber people come from the same way, is how can I protect as many people as
They
possible and
believe in
keep
the
our
mission.
community safe? Correct. Yeah.
Yeah.
And, and I think that's where at the core we've got to get back to, because cyber is a scary thing. But I think if we approach it similarly to what we do with some of these other professions, I think that'll make it a lot more approachable for people to consider as a career.
I agree. I need to be clear actually, because you said what we do. Redacted actually doesn't provide any red teaming as a service.
Mm.
And this is, I think, it links to the other point that Tom was making before. Everybody wants to be a hacker, right? Organizations
Yep.
have plenty of people who want to be hackers, right? And the problem is that we have an over reliance on tool sets which come externally.
Yep.
Tool sets that come from the US, but also an underserviced market is red team capability development, and that's why
Yep.
a lot of organizations don't have red teams, is because they don't. It's really difficult to invest in the capability development to be able to stand that up. So what Redacted does is red team capability development. I just wanted to be clear with that. On your
Yep.
point about other people being, other professions being able to cross skill into cyber, yeah, I mean, we've talked about this before, but I'm absolutely there with you on that. And I mean, when I was asked to do some work, in the army with the new cyber squadron, they they had people from all other jobs, all other corps in there, right? They had infantry who traditionally, we have all these jokes about them being, in knuckle dragging infantry, kind of very vibes, but
Oh,
a
that's
lot
still
of
the
them are
case,
very
is
smart.
it?
I'm glad you
well,
said that, not me.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
I'll be looking over my shoulder.
That's going to make a nice little clip.
yeah, but please don't. So look, Simon,
Just
my
in
business
isolation,
partner,
without any context in it, Remy. We're just going to put that in there.
infantry.
The knuckle dragging infantry.
Simon, my business partner, he's an infantry officer, so I can say that.
I'll say no
and
more then. Yeah, say no more.
he'll hit me about it later on.
Yeah.
But we had people from everywhere. It didn't matter what you used to be doing, as long as you were you had a passion for it, you were good at cybersecurity. Like a lot of these people, they'd done capture the flag stuff like every evening. You know, they'd been in their infantry battalion and at night, instead of doing whatever people in the infantry do at night, they they'd be sitting on their computers and they'd be learning cybersecurity. They'd be doing they'd be doing something on Udemy, or they would be doing Hack the Box, or they'd be doing whatever. And they
Yep.
just got good at it through their own passion. And then, Army said, we need people who are good at cyber, and all these people put their hands up and they're like, great. And it didn't matter what they did before. And that was good in many respects. I'm not going to wax nebulous about the bad points of it, but that was great. And I think we need that reflected in we need that reflected in industry as well.
Yep.
And it strikes me as a similar kind of thing to what I saw at I went to the Women in Security Summit.
Yep.
And there was one of the panelists on one of the panels there talked about that because only 17% of women have IT degrees. So only, that's a statistic at a university saying this is the proportion of women who do IT degrees. They just decided to remove the requirement for an IT degree from their cybersecurity roles simply because they would, from the outset, be limiting themselves, and that they knew that that was not necessarily a good mark of learning in cybersecurity, and that it was perhaps preventing people, like you were saying, from the nurses who have great crisis response skills from being able to come across and cross skill, or to be able to get jobs in cybersecurity.
Yeah, I think that's what we need, don't we? We need that broad church. Yeah, we need that broad church looked at because I think, and this is what we said off the top, is that when people look at cybersecurity, they think of it in a very narrow lens. And then when you actually broaden it out and say you could work in incident response or GRC, or you could do red teaming or some form of that cultural awareness piece as well. There's great people in there that actually are there to teach the organization about, which is in essence a marketing sort of role in a way, to market to people or to sell the cyber message. So there is so many different things that we need to get across to say to people that you're not restricted. I think there's a job pretty much for everyone in cybersecurity, really, if we clearly define what all those roles are and then what the requirements would be and the extra skill set. I believe that will drag more people across into the industry and into the organizations to actually help fill the gaps, because still that number that we saw, is about a 30,000 job gap between now and 2030, when the strategy runs till. We don't need to look at that as just being, let's fill the front end pipeline. That's still important. But it's also, where can we drag and cross skill people from other areas that will have requisite skills that, and especially understanding business. That's the other thing, Remy, I'm sure you'll touch on here, but understanding business and the impact. You spoke about that. How long are we offline for? Do we have online payments? How accessible is our client's data? And where are our crown jewels, and identifying where those things are, because a lot of businesses still aren't aware of what exposure they have. Some simple SQL injections into businesses, and I know some big ones that we've done ones into, that you can get access to all their client data and everything like that, and home addresses, etc. There's some really simple stuff, and I think we need to look at, as an organisation, as a country, is the 101 basics of cyber sometimes aren't even covered. You don't have to try that hard to break into a business, and that's the real shame of it.
And a lot of people will find those in their first red teaming activity, right? They'll get a broad church coverage, and then you'll be able to hone in on getting very, very good over a period of time, because it's not a one-off kind of activity. This is what, our thinking is that you don't do things once, you do things continuously, and then you continuously improve upon that. Just a quick on your thing about the SQL injection and very simple things. We have a podcast which we only talk about red team stuff, but we get technical pen testers and red teamers on to talk about stuff, hacks that they've done, obviously under the proper authorities. And what they've been able to do.
That goes without saying. We don't even need a disclaimer for that, Remy. That's.
I have people come at me a long time being like, you can't do this, you can't do that. You can do anything you want as long as you own the things that you're doing.
Correct.
Yeah. We don't let the lawyers hear me say that. But
that's another clip. That's another clip.
That's another clip.
That was the knuckle dragging. Yeah, we'll just put those in there. We'll put them together.
You're
actually,
in trouble.
Knuckle draggers, and then the legal stuff. So keep going. You go well.
But we had somebody on who, they talked about how they were doing a pen test in one organization, but that organization had significant access into a second one, so a third
Mm.
party in here. But the access was incredible, and it was a
Yep.
major national brand, and it was ginormous. And we actually, you're getting the message here first, because we were asked not to publish that particular story simply because it was just too. It's
Well,
just
it's
too
already on
awesome.
the dark web, isn't it? We can
So,
just send a link
well,
to.
well, no, because they
Okay,
did this red team
they
activity,
got
they
it in.
managed to find that they were a significant supply chain risk to this behemoth of another
Mm.
company, who obviously hadn't done their own red teams or hadn't done enough supply chain analysis.
And that's the
But
thing too.
they
This
tightened
this is
themselves up.
that. Yeah, that's it, Remy. So this is the other thing, right? Is that the third party risk is just so undervalued.
Oh, it's unbelievable.
I just, I sometimes it confounds me that these
Yeah.
businesses that are dealing with these other companies and they go through credit checks with them. It's like, oh, we've got to check that your credit's okay, and let's go and ring
Yeah,
three of
your
your
people and
suppliers
that
with
sort of
that.
stuff.
But what about your cyber, right?
Yeah,
Let's do a little slight audit on that and call maybe three people and try and
yeah.
make sure that your
I
cyber
mean, this
posture's in
was
order.
they were doing like handling, so they were doing some systems integration to platforms that they run,
Mm,
and the uh, the red team found that they had had an unsecured Git repo that
yep,
had hard coded credentials for the third party's environment, which
right.
allowed them to just start you know getting into that third party. And you're kind of like, yeah, this is the thing, right? If you're
Yeah,
doing supply chain assessment, it shouldn't just be like a tick and flick. Like you got this,
yeah,
you get this massive spreadsheet of questions being like, do you have your ISO 27001? Like, do you
yeah,
have, do you have an instant response plan? Yeah, you got all those. Yeah, great. Yeah, you can be our
yeah.
supplier, sort of thing. Those are important, but you
Mm,
should also, go, hey, we've noticed that you operate like publicly fronted Git repos, which is fine because
mm,
you have a distributed workforce. But look at all these ones that are open that you use hard coded creds for, and look at all
yep,
these ones over here and here. Like doing a red team, I'm not necessarily saying that every company should enforce a red team activity as part of their supply chain, but you should think about it. You should think
yeah,
about demanding penetration testing and red teaming as part reports as part of your third party supply chain, because it shows things like that. It
yep.
shows that you are inducing significant risk in your company through the way that they behave as an integrator or a supporter of your business.
Yep, absolutely. No, that's it. I think that's the next stage, and has to be evolution of something that needs to be put in place. Because as I
Yeah,
said, you check the
absolutely.
credit viability of a company, and even that's a bit iffy at times. But
Yeah, I
there's
know.
virtually no follow through there. But yeah, Tommy, I better let you in for a question, or else Remy and I are just going to
Oh,
free
yeah, we
form
just
for a
I
probably
don't.
while.
talk
So
forever.
yeah, we'll just keep
I'm
going.
enjoying this, but look, it's. I think what's at risk, and while we don't know the full details, but Bryden's lawyers, the announcement yesterday
Mm.
is 600 gigabytes of data. So
Yeah,
people use lawyers for all sorts of reasons,
all
and if
sorts
now
of
that's
nasty
it's
things.
out for sale for anyone, and then the ability to exploit that, and then also the fact that you can just use some, Gen AI tools to actually maximize the use of that in a nefarious way. So I guess it kind of leads me around to the question of, what is your experience? So people's process and technology. I'd kind of imagine, based on what I see out there, that people and therefore the processes that they develop is probably the thing that is uncovered the most in a red teaming exercise. Is it more balanced, or is it just very specific
Um,
to the way a business is built?
Yeah, I think it is usually people and process that allow some of the more significant steps to be taken in a red team, and that usually need to have some updating. But again, it's that piece of no plan survives the first shot, right? So you take the first
Mm,
shot and see what happens. And it's one of those things where as a business we love metrics, like you were saying before, Jason, that everybody can take a framework and then they can have a dashboard and say, look at how many parts of the MITRE defend framework that we're totally doing. Look at our ISO compliance or our SOC 2 or whatever else, right?
mm,
People love to produce dashboards about these things, but the once that shot gets fired and you find that it's not about you know yeah, you can get some quick wins by using a framework, and that's a good starting point, but it needs to be specific to your business and the way that your
mm,
business operates. Because once you build the plan, and if it's some random, I say this is some random infosec consultant that writes other people's plans. That's a lot of what I
mm,
do. Has written this thing in isolation and not really understood your business and how they operate. Uh, you know, when you pull the plan out, it goes badly, and
Yep.
that's pretty easy to see. It's easy to measure things like what are the protective controls that we're doing, right? How many of our machines are part of, the new Entra ID deployment that we've got MFA turned on, and how many are on the old
Mm.
legacy, on-premise domain controller? How many, do we have covered by our incremental backups, and how many do we not? And how are we handling, anti malware protections, and what's our coverage for EDR? That stuff is really easy to pull and put on a dashboard. But what's really difficult to quantify is, great, that XDR has said, bing, you've got a thing happening here. Somebody's run this
Mm.
nefarious PowerShell. You've got 3 pieces of malware over here. You've got something compromised. This has gone offline. Your database has like far too much traffic going to it when normally it has almost nothing. What are you supposed to do now? And pulling out that plan. And if it takes them, 2 to 3 days to get to a point where they're stopping the bleeding, then it's not a good plan, right?
Yeah.
It's not. They've already had 2 to 3 days to do whatever they need to do. So exfiltrate that 600 gigabytes of data, right? So protective controls are excellent, and I'm not saying that you shouldn't have them. Protective controls are great, but they will be circumvented eventually. So how can you keep your protective controls protecting you properly? That is a process thing. When one of them goes off, and says, I've got a detection here, because you got protection is the best thing you can do in terms of controls, then detection, and then response actions. But nearly everything below protection is all process driven, right?
Yeah.
Even detection stuff.
That's true.
Some
Yeah.
people will say, "Oh, I have all these alerts and that kind of thing." I'm like, great. Who looks at them? How many do you
Yeah.
have? Do
Exactly.
you have 10,000 a
And you
day?
get flooded with them.
Sorry, but
Yeah.
that's not
That's
useful.
right. Yeah, and that's
Too
how do you
many.
prioritize? Yeah, how do you prioritize that? Because
Yeah.
that's exactly it. You switch a lot of these things on, and then it comes through and becomes overwhelmed, right? It's another
Yeah.
thing, and then it's like, well, which ones do we look at? And that percentage is pretty low. So do I really worry about that? But that could ratchet up in a couple of days. But in that sort of environment, and if you're not a big enough team, you just go, yeah, I looked at that a couple of days ago. It wasn't an issue. Don't worry about it. But that can escalate up really quickly within a
Yeah.
couple of hours or a couple of days, and that thing that got looked at a couple of days when you weren't so busy, and now you're busy and you haven't got time to go back to the logs and check stuff out, now becomes critical. And then how's that flashing, or how are you seeing that? There's no red light on top of your computer that just sneaks up, and then all of a sudden one of your competitors gets hacked and you go, actually, fuck, I looked at that a couple of days ago. Oh shit, that's a big thing now, but that's what happens,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
That's what happens, so, and on
exactly.
the lawyer thing, my own experience, and this is, my own thing, but I found they're the hardest ones to sell or get onto. Now, we talked about our good friend Annie Hagar, who's a cyber lawyer, and I'm sure when you work in an environment like that and you are a lawyer who specializes in that,
Yep.
that is a
She's very good
thing.
at what she does.
She is. And on the other side, if it's a normal lawyer, just say criminal lawyer, whatever,
Yeah.
they are very difficult. I've found they are very difficult to get services into, to pick up, or to actually have any concern about a lot of things. And the thing that got me into cybersecurity back sort of 2016, 17 was actually an attack that happened to one of our clients when we had a domain name hosting business. It was actually a small law firm on the Gold Coast, only 10 people, that actually had an incident where they actually had 3 of their clients had property settlements fall over to the tune of $782,000, and they were no longer in business 6 months after that. So we thought, when we built CyberAware, which was one of the first products that Jonathan Horn and I sort of were working on together, and put that in market, we thought this is going to be something lawyers are going to gobble up because of that and that experience we'd had at such close hand. They were the hardest ones, along with sort of accountants and stuff, that were actually to get into. So I don't know, what about you with the experience? When you think about what they hold and the sensitive information and all that sort of stuff, you think, sometimes in the market you think, oh, they're going to be all over it, right? That's going to. What's your experience been with that sort of profession, and other stories, that you can sort of share on
So
that?
I've found in generally the lawyers that I've talked to, they're very outwardly focused,
Yep.
rather than inwardly focused, which is, I think, the first thing. They're also obviously very focused on law and litigation. What must
Yep.
I do to not do anything illegal, right?
Correct.
And
Yep.
when the laws say things like you have to provide reasonable protection in the circumstances, right? When it has statements like that in it, the lawyers go, well, what is reasonable? And what are the circumstances
How
that
far
I'm
do I have
in?
to go to be reasonable?
Yeah, how far do I have to go to be reasonable? And I actually fight that battle all the time. What is reasonable? Because I
Yep.
say reasonable is actually going through you can say, I have these two companies on incident response retainer. I have these two, anti-malware products. I have firewalls up the wazoo. I have,
Mm.
implemented zero trust with policy enforcement points everywhere, and I have certificate-based MFA and keys, and you can say you have the best security ever, and you can implement that, and you probably will have quite good security. But the only way you're ever going to know how good it is by going through a quality assurance process. And the only way to go through an end-to-end quality assurance process is using a red team activity.
Mm.
But most people say, well, that's not reasonable. It's too hard, because it's difficult to do. And it's also, people see it as it might be self-introducing risk, right? What if the red team goes off chops and starts taking things down or whatever? Like, I can't trust red teamers, so it does kind of border on trust a little bit. So that aspect of reasonableness, I think, is really quite key to this. And I mean, it's in everything. It's in the Privacy Act, it's in the SOC Act, it's in everything that it says you must take reasonable steps. And how can you, directors are beholden to taking reasonable, steps for their company through ASIC laws and all sorts of things. So that's what lawyers look at,
we just saw that as well too, didn't we? Like ASIC,
exactly. The
the
new
last
one,
couple of days,
what
so,
was it? FII, I can't remember, but new ruling from ASIC, But it's one of those things where it's how do you convince them what is reasonable? Like if I sit here and I tell a law firm it is reasonable for you to have a cloud-based endpoint protection, and for you to have a managed SOC, and for you to use MFA on all of these different, you use Dropbox. Some law firms do. You should put MFA on that, and this is how that works, and you should have somebody else monitor it for logs and all this sort of thing. That's great. I can say that that's reasonable, but that's just me. They could find some other person who says they're a cybersecurity person to say, no, it's reasonable that you do these other things, right? So what is reasonable? That is the argument that we kind of have. You also have a cultural problem where, I mean, this is, again, a story is retold by me from Annie, but like there are senior lawyers who they have their paralegals. It doesn't matter if something comes through on an email, they will not read their email. Their emails must be printed out, and then the senior lawyer will sit there and they will write underneath their response on paper, and then that paralegal has to go and email that person with that response. That is the only way they will look at things. They refuse to open a computer. Now, that might seem madness to people who are listening to a podcast about cybersecurity, which is just, it's digital all over that, right? But these people are out there, and especially in such, probably, I actually cannot think of a more ancient profession, except maybe baking, than being a lawyer, right? What is more ancient than, the magistrate or the lawyer going from town to town, right? We're talking like pre-medieval days for this sort of thing. So when we go back that far, where is the cybersecurity? So they don't have the embedded culture, right? It is very recent. It is very young for them, and so they have significant issues adopting cybersecurity.
So it's interesting because, you take literally red teaming is that rehearsing of the worst event. And every time that, I've either done crisis communication or I speak to people in advance of that, the one thing I say is we need to get the lawyers in the room and we need to have a conversation with them about what they're going to do. Because if you suddenly turn up on the day and go, right, we're in the crisis, they're going to slow everything down. They're going to stop you doing anything, and you won't have that opportunity to have a conversation. And the other thing I think that's interesting is that when you go through that process in advance, often in case you find that lawyer is not the right, or that firm is not the right one to represent us, because they wouldn't allow us to be agile. They wouldn't allow us to speak out and have a proactive narrative so we could try and wrestle some control back of this situation.
Absolutely.
So again, it's all just back to that rehearsing, that live exercise.
And also, Tommy, I think that's the other part is, and insurance becomes a big issue in this as well. So if we sort of talk about that, and if you have an incident and you have to bring in lawyers and all those sorts of things as well, and this is often a part that's missed in these rehearsals, right? And this was the other part of that incident I was talking about earlier, is that they called the insurance company because this was real, right? And only the CISO knew. When they called the insurance company, they would have not given the claim due to, they would look straight away for a clause to actually exit out of this one, which was really interesting. So from doing the exercise, it actually sort of uncovered some stuff around the insurance part as well. So,
exactly.
These other things, these are all the moving parts that you got to think about. It's your financial, your legal, it's your insurance, it's all these things come into play. And And I think what Remy does, and as part of his work, is critically important because, again, you don't want to wait until insurance time to go, like people have floods and all that sort of stuff. You weren't covered for floods, or you're in a flood zone or bushfire. You've been paying all these premiums these years and you were never covered for it.
Yeah.
These incidents, and especially if you can make them as real as possible, will bring a lot of these things to light. And I think that's the other, and this is not to be scary or anything like that. It's just
No.
to wake people up.
Absolutely.
And the thing is that, you could save yourself millions of dollars and in some cases save your business if you go through this process, because until you do these things, and I think we should put this out in the open a lot more often, is that unless you go through this process, you often don't find this stuff out, and you would rather find out during an exercise or running through
Yeah.
something like your company does, rather than on the day it actually happens, because as we always say, it is not an if it happens, it's a when it happens. It's just a matter of time. So you want to be as
Yeah.
prepared, as best you can for that time when it happens. We're all going to die one day. We all have to pay taxes. They say death and taxes, but I reckon a
Yeah.
cyber incident should be thrown in that saying now too.
Yeah.
We're all going to get into some sort of cyber incident as well. So death, taxes, and a cyber attack. So
We
keep it
have
as real.
another saying that Simon trots out a lot. I'm actually not sure if he invented it, but I've only ever heard him say it, which is every company has a red team. You just might not have one that you own.
That's
Oh,
right.
I like that. I like that.
And the other one is too. Every company, or a lot of companies, have a red team that's working internally. That you're paying for
Yeah,
without even
exactly.
knowing. That's the other one.
Hey,
The
Remy, so
insider
look,
threat.
just to wrap this up, what's a
Sure.
call to action? So speaking out to someone, what's the kind of question they should be asking of their cybersecurity team, or what should they be thinking about in order to kind of get to actually take this step and to engage this conversation, to reach out to someone like yourself and start developing those processes? Um, you know, what's a call to action for them?
I'm not here to ask people to throw money at this problem. I would hazard that most organizations of a good enough size to benefit the most from red team activities actually already have the people internally to be able to do it. But it's more the capability development. So giving those people the tools that they need, the frameworks, and having the business understand how they can employ a red team effectively. So
So the
again, we go
permission.
a little bit back to process, but for us, we build red team capabilities for companies. So, if somebody wants to come to us and say, we would actually like to start doing this in an ongoing way so that we can have constant quality assurance, then we would work with them to then go, okay, what do you like? Do you want to improve your mean time to respond? Do you want to, like, what metric are we going to start with and then broaden from there? Because start small, work outwards. Grab a couple of people who are pretty good. We would apply some tool sets on there, have some mission parameters, put some real like left and rights on there, and then start running it and seeing the outcomes from the first one, and then improve and constantly. What you will find is that you will actually start reducing your spend on cybersecurity. And I know that sounds like crap marketing stuff. I'm not a marketing person, so I tell people this, and they're like, yeah, whatever. But once you do a red team activity, you actually find that the 2 or 3 tools that you're paying licensing for are just not like,
100%.
oh,
I've
this is
found that
great.
exactly. Yep, that's it.
This is
Yeah,
great.
that
I'm going to use this thing and this thing
never do.
here. And, I've got
Yep.
this great like automated incident management system thing. But
Yep.
then the way the business works and the way the responders end up doing
Waste of money.
things, and a couple of times it's a waste of money. They
Yep.
they don't do it. And so they get rid of that licensing. They focus on tightening up some of their processes. They go, actually, we do have all of these random virtual machines out here that the red team totally co-opted that we forgot were there. So we're going to turn all those off. And that's a bunch of Windows licensing. There's a bunch of infrastructure costs they're not paying. This database that was sitting there, who owns that? Oh my God, they left like 2 years ago.
Yeah.
So we should turn that off and stop storing that data. Like, you will find all sorts of things.
Yeah, that's it. I think that's where, because budgets are tighter, right? And Remy's exactly that point, is that's what I've found with people, because the budget constraint, like the cost of living crisis, is real, right? We talk about that all the time.
Even in businesses.
And in businesses it is, right? And this is where I find people sometimes paying 2 or 3 times for licenses which overlap, right? They just say it's got it built in the back of Microsoft, and they've got 2 other vendors that have sold them stuff like as a silver bullet, and it does exactly the same thing, just not as good. And that's exactly the thing. But before we do close, I know that was sort of one just on that. If we could sort of just go back to what I mentioned at the top and sort of separate also your other passion as well, Remy, with
Yeah,
regard to
definitely.
vulnerable people.
Yeah. So red team is intrinsically linked to threat modeling or understanding what threats do. And I'm not necessarily talking about deep cyber threat intelligence here, but it's easy for me to sit here and say that you should do a threat model and have a red team and that kind of thing, and that's fine for businesses and probably government. But for smaller businesses and then individuals, and then going down even further, it is nigh on impossible to deliver effective cybersecurity down to the individual level unless you're simply delivering products. Right?
Mm,
It's really, really hard, and so uh, realistically, the only way I see that occurring is through cybersecurity education, and we have a generational shift happening. Right, we have what we call digital natives, which
mm,
you got pros and cons of, but particularly on the side of the elderly or other vulnerable people. We have issues where they're targeted because they have a completely different threat model to what I am paid to look at.
mm,
So I get paid to look at threat models and generate red team capability for nation state tier sort of stuff or large criminal groups or that kind of thing. Scammers that target individuals or even somebody that who in a domestic violence scenario is now what we would call an adversary, is somebody who
mm,
is trying to track you or trying to obtain your data through your online accounts. That is a very different threat model and one that is not well looked after or understood because nobody puts money into it.
mm,
Nobody pays people like me to really address those kinds of issues. And I mean, the government's attempting it. They've got some good things going in place and some grants and all sorts of things happening, but it does not have the weight of expertise behind it that a lot of this higher order stuff we've been talking about is. So I recognized that a while ago, and we used to have a program which we are re-rolling out for the ACT. But in Melbourne, we did a whole bunch of seminars for older Australians into how to stay cyber secure, as well as scam safety and awareness. And I actually found quite some really exceptional outcomes from that, both for them, but also in not underestimating the intelligence of these vulnerable communities, because
mm,
we'd teach them all sorts of things, but we would really end up reaching a pivot point where if we could teach them, a set of 4 or 5 things that weren't your traditional, like cyber secure, you should use MFA, use a password manager, strong passwords, all that sort of stuff. Yes, of course, we mentioned those kinds of things, but literally just understanding how things work at a base level from a human interacting with machine level.
mm,
We found such great outcomes in just teaching people how domain names work. Right, you were
mm.
talking about your DNS, web hosting service back in the day.
Yep.
There is plenty of those people in vulnerable communities. The real nexus point is they actually don't understand when you say don't click on a link. They don't understand what that link actually
Mm,
looks like or means. Like they don't know how to read it. Right, I can look at a phishing SMS or an email and go almost instantly, yeah, that's phishing,
yep.
obviously. Like, because the only thing I look at is what they are trying to me do, what they are asking me to do. What is the ask? What is the
Mm.
call to action? Because you must do something to be able to be caught in the phishing, right? So
And usually it's urgent too, isn't it?
yeah,
And
and
through
being
smishing
able
as
to
well,
read
like
that,
through SMS, because certain
yeah,
people get parcels delivered now or buy things through Amazon and all that sort of stuff, and the scammers
exactly.
are using those sorts of things. So that whole slowing down and yeah, it just
And
taking the
but
time
being
to
able
look at
to
your
just
links and stuff.
read that one technical part,
Yeah.
because that is the
Mm,
one technical part, and just teaching them that point has been really, really powerful. But then it follows through to all of the other things. Once we've been able to teach them that, it's a little bit like a snowball effect, and they start to
mm.
get everything else because they start to
With
think
phone
about things
calls and
like,
everything. Yeah.
yeah, all sorts of things like that, and
Mm,
about how people masquerade and things. And
yep.
again, like I talked a lot about the older Australians and the threat model they face as scammers. But now that we're starting to examine, domestic violence and the way
Mm,
that your digital world is used against you in those scenarios and how bad it can
yep.
be, especially now with so much tracking material,
Mm.
the air tags and
Air tags. Yeah.
people in other people's
Find my
iClouds, and
phone.
all sorts of
Yep.
stuff. Yeah, all that stuff is really, really hard. And there are some
Mm,
great people doing some great things. It doesn't have the money behind it at the moment that it should, but you know, having as you said before, I have a passion to be able to try and improve that. So we do some work trying to improve that and create education programs, but also some probably more physical outcomes. About how to actually detect if this is occurring. And some of it can be a bit technical, but it can be very, very powerful and very protective for those people, and stop a lot of harm,
Mm.
by bad people. And
Yeah.
again, coming back to believing in the mission, right? This is our believing in the mission. We want to stop harms from happening from cybersecurity. Sometimes that means we must induce the harm, but in a safe way.
Yep.
But other times it means that we need to arm people with the knowledge and tools themselves to be able to prevent the harms happening from themselves.
Yeah. Well said. Yeah,
Yeah.
because I think that's where we need to tackle from everything. And, through the work that Tom and I are doing with Murphin and, obviously the Australian Cyber Network, we're looking at, building a volunteer network and trying to help as much we can. So I'm sure we'll continue that on, and even with the, Dynamic Standards International, with the SMB 1001 to look after small to medium sized businesses. We do have to attack it from so many different angles. There isn't a single point or a single weakness point, unfortunately, in this cyber battle, that we have such a broad spectrum, but we really do need to look after the people that are less able to sort of protect themselves. And as we grow and as bigger organizations grow, they should really be looking after it. I did a post the other day about the banks. We really need to employ that UK model. They've got 5 days to basically reimburse the money. That some of the onus needs to be shifted on these organizations that are making massive profits but doing nothing to protect these people that are losing their livelihoods, due to the sorts of attacks we've spoken about here today. So I just wanted to sort of close off on that, because I know it's something that's sort of how we met really in the first place, was to sort of look after that layer. But it is underfunded at the moment. Not many people are aware of it, and human nature is to look after yourself first, right? But we do need, as a community and as a country, I think, when there's floods and fires and all that sort of stuff, we really do care, and we sort of donate money and do all that sort of stuff. But these sorts of attacks are in some ways more impactful at a broader level, and can have, you talked about domestic violence, the consequence of domestic violence and how many women actually get killed in this country, from domestic violence. They're the main ones that are impacted from this, is quite high. And what the perpetrators will do to try and keep control and contact these people and keep tabs on them is disgraceful, and it needs to be something done. There needs to be some stopgap measures put in place, because if these people can be found easily and tracked, the consequences of that are quite serious. We have spoken about businesses and the consequence to a business, and a business attack, and can put a business out of business, and that can have broad ranging effects on the person who owns the business and others. But the domestic violence piece, and these vulnerable people we talk about, elder people in Australia losing their whole life savings and having their accounts cleaned out, people in domestic violence situations, young children that can be accessed by people that are looking to cause harm. These are issues that should never be ignored, and I think we need to put more focus on that as a country. And Tom and I are definitely behind you and back you, and through all the other stuff I do as well. So I just wanted to close on that. So it's probably a bit of a different switch, but I just wanted to make sure that we didn't miss covering that while we had you on here, mate. So thank you.
I tried to connect it with the threat modeling stuff.
Well, I'm sure Tom will make a clip out of that. Don't worry about it.
It'd be great.
Knuckle dragging lawyers and that.
But also save the vulnerable.
Correct. Yeah, and that's at the end, right? So.
That was a really powerful way to end this. And I think, if you're listening to this podcast, I'm going to assume you probably have a bit more cyber knowledge than most people in your extended network. And so I'd ask you to turn around and go and find out who's lacking a bit of that knowledge and who really needs a bit of help. Have a conversation. Show them what a DNS is. Show them some basic backgrounds, because knowledge is power. And what you're doing is you're empowering them to make good decisions rather than just being overwhelmed by the speed of it. So, look, thank you as always, Jason, for joining us. And thank you, Remy. That was a really fantastic conversation. And I think there's a lot in that for the listeners.
Thanks for having me.
Tom.
It's been great.
Yeah, thanks, Remy. Cheers, mate.